So culture can be well defined, and it can be manipulated to benefit a people. And America sort of really is a melting pot. And I think that there are certain cultures in America that are extremely well defined. For instance, the little I know of the Mormon culture says that their religion preaches an obligation to do the very best in your professional life that you're capable of. It establishes an extreme distaste for debt. And that one little thing can create powerful chain reactions beyond belief, There's a sense of security from knowing that you have a year's worth of food and fuel at the ready. They do not do a lot of things that the ancient Kemetic folk didn't do, in terms of cursing or lying or cheating. So just an example, I live in a community that has a fair percentage of Orthodox Jews. Again, very well-defined culture, very universally understood set of positive expectations. They really serve them well. And I hate to use religious examples because, that's not necessarily true. For instance, I have a daughter that lives in Minnesota, a large Scandinavian population. And they had this thing they call Scandinavian nice. They're apparently nice people. When people move there, it's like, why is everybody so nice? But it doesn't have to be that way, And sometimes culture is dictated to you. Like one of the really negative things about being in prison is your culture is dictated to you. So we're going to be looking at culture a lot as we move forward. And at this point, it can be conscious and explicitly defined or not. It can be consciously manipulated for the common good or not. It can be really screwed up and be accepted or not. It can be allowed to get worse every day for decades or not. But I think it helps a whole lot if we're conscious of it and we recognize that it can be manipulated for the benefit of all or not. Now, another one of those true stories, okay? There's a group here in St. Louis called St. Paul's Saturdays. It was founded by Dr. Harrison, who's now passed, but he was a serious brother. And as the 80s unfolded and crack cocaine entered the black community and it started really spinning out of control, his pastor, who went on to become a bishop, I think in the AME church, I may be wrong about that, asked Brother Harrison, because he was a significant executive in the community college system here in St. Louis, to do something to try to help the males in the church. And he came up with this idea that he called St. Paul's Saturdays. And when I talked to him about it personally, he said, look, I don't have any children, so I have some time. And I just decided that I was going to spend every Saturday with these kids. And they had a moral code, if you will, that they recited. Kind of like my eye, they were going to do certain things, they were going to be responsible. They were going to go to college without exception, they were going to be leaders in whatever they did. And basically every other week he took them on a field trip. He thought it was important that they see things outside of their immediate neighborhood. And the other Saturdays, either they would do kind of like a fireside chat, if you will, or he'd bring in people. I'm proud to say he brought me in a few times to both present, but also to listen, to have discussion, to answer questions. I have a tremendous amount of respect for Brother Hassan. And once a year, they would do a dinner. It was at the church. It wasn't fancy, but they made it kind of formal. And this year that I want to speak to, they had a speaker who was literally a contemporary African chief. And his topic was traditional African rites of passage. And of course, you know, in traditional Africa, culture was well defined and was manipulated for the benefit of all. And his central point was this wasn't like 2 weeks in the bush, you know, at the period of time represented maturity, entering maturity. His point was this was a multi-year process. In every year of a child's life, there were certain expectations that they were expected to prove that they had gained certain knowledge that they were expected to show that they had mastered. And you know how sometimes when somebody gives a speech, they say something, and it's like, oh, I get that. But I know there's more to that I didn't get. Well, that happened to me. The phrase that caught my attention is, he said, it was a long way to the watering hole. So as we're inclined to do, you know, after the event is over, you know, those of us who have questions kind of queue up to ask the speaker. And this is the story of this conversation that we had. True story, true conversation. So if you will, center yourselves again. You know, just really get comfortable and close your eyes and take those deep breaths and become present. And soon I will start the village chief, which is the name I gave the story. It was a long way to the watering hole, and each adult member of the village was actively involved in assuring that each child developed into honorable manhood or womanhood. I was totally captivated by the speaker, an African chief, as he orally conveyed the history of Africa. He spoke of the customs, values, beliefs, government, the daily life of the people, every aspect of the motherland. His voice was warm and lyrical, and he would demonstrate the dances and chants while conveying their meaning. He presented the statement as an aside. No explanation was given, and hence I didn't understand its meaning. Yet I was certain that a powerful observation had been made and couldn't wait to ask for further explanation. His face looked bewildered by my request, but seeing the sincerity in my face, he began to instruct. Traditional African society was matriarchal, yet everyone in the village was actively involved in child rearing, and particularly the elders. In fact, instruction of the youth was the principal responsibility of the elders. It was a long way to the watering hole, and the daily trip was made by women and children, the least defensive members of the village. The village couldn't allow a single child to develop who failed to embrace the village's positive values. For if the village neglected a single child's needs, everyone's wife and children would be in danger each day as they made the trip to the watering hole. And remember that a girl child's chief economic value related to the dowry or marriage portion that would be negotiated at the time of her betrothal. If your daughter lost her virginity on the way to or from the watering hole, rather than the occasion of a considerable dowry and the joy and satisfaction of a marriage ceremony, she brought tremendous shame upon her family, and being unable to marry became an economic burden upon them for her entire life. We talked on, and he explained that traditional African rites of passage involved more than manhood and womanhood training at the age representative of the passage into manhood or womanhood. It was a process. They followed the entire life of the child, beginning at age 3. Each year the child would learn certain principles and demonstrate that knowledge through mastering something, perhaps a dance, that demonstrated that understanding and, in fact, was specifically designed to teach that specific principle.
Children were taught a worldview in which everyone and everything is interdependent. A view that establishes the importance of each child and each child's obligation to be a dependable, reliable, knowledgeable, and wise link in the chain of life. The village demanded an honorable and responsible life. One's future generations were dependent upon another's family judging you worthy to join with and extend that family's gene pool. He continued, Africans have that unique ability to nail you with a question while appearing to simply be sincerely asking for enlightenment only. He couldn't resist dropping the hammer. How and what do you African Americans teach your children? The question snapped through my brain and then began a series of painful ricochets. How and what do you African Americans teach your children? I thought of the fact that my living in University City constantly exposed me to seeing my Jewish neighbors walking their children to and from the temple for weekly training. I remember conversations where Jews attempted to explain to me what it means to be a Jew, and the many holidays that assure that no generation fails to understand their heritage and history. How and what do you African Americans teach your children? The thought of Sunday school leapt into my brain in a vain attempt to stop the painful ricochets. Yet, as I realized how little of this training was African-specific, the fact that it attempts to teach important values seemed to be depreciated by its failure to ground our children in an understanding of and appreciation for our rich and humane African heritage. How and what do you African Americans teach your children? I finally responded. We explicitly teach them very little. We have no established institutions which we control, dedicated to their nurturing and development. We aren't even in agreement regarding what values we would teach if such existed. You've forgotten that it's a long way to the watering hole, and that's why so much of the African American village is self-destructing, he stated. Rather than teach your children the rich and important values of their ancestors, you'd rather put bars to your windows and raise your babies' babies. The inability to find a decent job is no reason to abandon one's family. It shouldn't depreciate a man's value in the eyes of his wife and children. Money doesn't equal manhood. Sex doesn't equal womanhood. And why don't you explain to your children that they are an extension of God himself? And how dare you allow the devils you failed to raise into responsible adults push drugs of death upon your village and your village's children? The warmth and tact typical of Africans had been replaced by the cold directness typical of Americans. I had thought how and what do you African Americans teach your children had caused a painful chain reaction. My head now felt as if it would burst. I formed my lips to begin a defense with the word but before I could, he continued. Yes, you African Americans suffered greatly under the most brutal and inhumane form of slavery this earth has ever known. Yes, traditional African society had slaves, yet they were treated as valued members of the family. It has been over 100 years since the end of slavery. It has been 20 years since the civil rights movement allowed the return of full dignity to your lives. What have you done with this newfound freedom? What more than teach and allow your children to believe that money is the beginning, middle, and the end of everything, regardless of how it's acquired? This is not consistent with the African tradition that teaches that honor, knowledge, wisdom, and exercising one's responsibility to the universe establishes one's value. I was suddenly very tired, to the point of feeling faint. My head continued to hurt. Fortunately, I think he deemed I'd had enough. The warmth returned to his face. His voice returned to the sweet lyrical refrains that make listening to Africans so entertaining and enjoyable. He smiled and softly stated, "You've just forgotten that it's a long way to the watering hole. Explicitly and consciously raise your children. Teach them the values of their ancestors, and you can take the bars down from your doors. And others will not replace your many man-childs currently controlled by the criminal justice system. Just remember that it's a long way to the watering hole, and each member of the village has a shared responsibility for child rearing. He then focuses attention on those who had been patiently awaiting for their opportunity to ask the presenter their most salient questions regarding the establishment of rites of passage, manhood, and womanhood training programs. Whenever you're ready, feel free to open your eyes. We always know that we could have done a better job. Hindsight is better than 2020. But again, I just want to remind, no blame, shame, or fault is associated with anything that we'll be covering. The truth will set us free. Okay, but let's have a little discussion, if you will. We could do it as a round robin, or we could do it as an open discussion. But what do you think about the village chief? The story that we just heard, yeah.
The village chief kind of reminds me of my granddaddy. My granddaddy, he took care of a lot of things. He kind of orchestrated a lot of things. He and my grandmother both, but he started the day. Of course, my grandmother started the day with breakfast to feed the village chief, so to speak. And then, the kids, she'd do the kids or whatever. But my granddaddy, he would talk with my uncles, before they got to this breakfast or whatever, And I guess he would tell them his expectations of them for the day or what he wanted them to do. And the village chief just reminds me of my granddaddy, but he's not here anymore. But structure.
And a lot of people my age remember that structure from their grandparents, and it was quite different.
Yes.
We forget that not that long ago, I guess right into the 60s, we didn't have 70% of black kids without a male figure in the home. We had 95% of children were raised with a father or figure in the home, and there was structure.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, keep don't want to interrupt.
Oh, but it just that's what you asked what I thought about the village chief. That's what I thought about the village chief. And my granddaddy, he was a village chief. He set rules, and we had to live by those rules. And if we didn't live by those rules, then you had to make alternative decisions. And it was that way for the whole family. I mean, his children, his grandchildren, all of that.
And how are we doing today? As a people?
And as a people, as I say, being a young girl of 23 years old and first time meeting my father for the first time ever in my life, not having my own village chief, so to speak, being my biological father, I had a great role model being my uncle, my grandfather, my uncles, and to current day, still that same village chief is still round robin or gathering us up as a family and making sure we come together as a family and do things as a family, and but because of what my grandmother and my granddaddy taught them and what they taught, and I say what I learned from them. And one of the things that I learned from my grandparents and my uncles current day is how to be content in life. So I miss the village chief.
I think a lot of us do. You got something on your mind over there, Jesse? I can feel it.
No, well, me, I learned from when I was down in Mississippi with my grandfather and grandmother, when I was staying down there with them. You know, both of them, they put a hard road down for us. So you gonna either bounce to it, or you gonna find your way back any way you can. But it was all good though. So, you know, I tried to enlighten it into my kids, but them two, I don't know. They headstrong. They don't want to listen. So, you know, it is what it is. But I learned a hard lesson though, a good lesson. So.
Okay, so did your kids grow up in the same culture? You know, talking about the broader culture, the neighborhood, the school.
Yeah.
That you
They
grew
up here in the city. My son was born over on the west side, over on Coke Brilliant, 1976. Then my daughter was born where I'm staying at now, on the other part, on the north side, which is where she was born in 77. And the school that they got transferred from city schools to white schools. So they went there and they caused chaos there, but they still graduated though, so I was proud of them of that. But like I said, what happened down along the road with them and they mindset ways, I don't know. Like I said, call it, instead of them being leaders, they want to be followers. They want to turn around and be like the group, which is what the group now is all messed up. So.
Okay.
Yeah. You told an exquisite story of your life, and I'm privileged to be here next to you to listen to it. It isn't about deserving anything, but was given the gift of having two parents. I was from my own tribe. I'm from a family of 6 children, so there's a really cool dynamic with that. My parents were together their whole life, and because of the quantity of kids in our tiny tribe, and I say this and people think, wow, your mother sounds like she was really a shrew, but she wasn't, and it sort of went like this. If one of us said, Mom, I'm sick. Mom, I can't go to school. And the second child in our family was always confined to a crib until he died at the age of 13. And so my mother's attitude was, well, you're just fine, you're going to go to school. Or if we were really sick, she would say essentially, well, you're going to go upstairs and you're going to go to bed and you're going to get up and come down when you're better. And she wasn't being unloving. She was just being, keeping order in this crowd of kids, one of whom had very serious needs. By comparison, I look at how my husband was brought up, and he was brought up after his father died at Francis's age of 13, so he was essentially brought up by a single mom because of the death of his father, and she was a widow furthermore, and he was the youngest in the nest, so they were just a unit of 2. And she was the chiefess, and she was the glue of the family, and until she died recently at the age of 96, it was very clear that she was the one that caused us all to still see each other, be civilized with each other, tolerate each other, and that's gone. But someone else, I believe, one of our nieces, is stepping up to the plate to be that loving glue, regardless of all of our idiosyncrasies and our intolerances. We will all abide, but that's my story.
You know, it's interesting. You're all reflecting back on people that provided what I call meaningful longitudinal relationships with an empowered adult for your life. And much, much later in this series, we'll spend hours talking about how that conveys empowerment, certainly to children, but also person to person, adult to adult. People who are willing to gift you with some of their life, because our time is our life, who also love you and are committed to your nurture and development. And that's exactly what the village chief was about. Exactly what the village chief was about. He said, we've forgotten that it's a long way to the watering hole. But you know how we talked about allowing things to just get worse? If you notice, early in the story, he cut it from a totally different perspective. He said that the village recognized that they couldn't allow a single deviant to develop, because if they did, nobody's loved ones would be safe as they made this long trek to and from the watering hole. So everybody felt a commitment to every child. And I'm not trying to say just because of that reason, but because children were viewed as not necessarily your property, but as a valued member of the village, and that the village had a responsibility to bring these children to responsible adulthood. It's just another example of culture. Or not. You know, that one word culture drove me crazy. I mean, really. I told you about my 32-year struggle. And then, frankly, I went through another 8 years that I call boxing with God. I don't think I told you about that. But that's like, oh, okay, so you got some answers. Right. You have the catalyst for healing the Afro-American community. And people said I should teach this body of knowledge. And I started teaching it, and I've been amazed ever since. So it's been a long journey. It's been literally a 40-year journey. But one word drove me crazy more than any other, and it's the word culture. And I mean, I spent like whole nights, like literally, till the sun came up, searching the internet, trying to find a definition of culture that I could feel comfortable with. And it sounded like they were circular arguments and, way over here and way out there. And, one person would say, well, culture is intelligence. I'm like, what? And intelligence is culture. What? And in one of those nights of search, I found a single page. This page just came up all by itself, And it was Texas A&M. It was a page off of their website. So, if you keep going back to the home, it was Texas A&M. But it was just this page, and this page started out with definitions of culture. And this is what it said. Culture refers to the cumulative deposit of knowledge, experience, beliefs, values, attitudes, meanings, hierarchies, religion, notions of time, roles, spatial relationships, concepts of the universe, and material objects and possessions acquired by a group of people in the course of generations. It went on to say, culture is communication, and communication is culture. It went on to say, culture in its broadest sense is cultivated behavior that is the totality of a person's learned, accumulated experience which is socially transmitted, or more briefly, behavior through social learning. A culture is a way of life of a group of people. The behaviors, beliefs, values, and symbols that they accept, generally without thinking about them, and that are passed along by communication and imitation from one generation to the next. And I went, wow, I finally get it. Culture is everything. Literally everything. Let me say it again. Culture refers to the cumulative deposit of knowledge, experience, beliefs, values, attitudes, meanings, hierarchies, religion, notions of time, roles, spatial relationships, concepts of the universe, and material objects and possessions acquired by a group of people in the course of generations. Culture is communication. Communication is culture. Culture, in its broadest sense, is cultivated behavior. That is the totality of a person's learned, accumulated experience, which is socially transmitted. Or more briefly, behavior through social learning. A culture is a way of life of a group of people. The behaviors, beliefs, values, and symbols that they accept, generally without thinking about them, and that are passed along by communication and imitation from one generation to the next. Or my three-word summary, culture is everything. Now, let's not deal with the poles, okay? I mean, let's not deal with, say Mormons and Orthodox Jews over here and maybe African Americans. Let's just deal with the middle, okay? Some people are born into a culture that they absorb like osmosis that says, of course you're going to go to college. Of course you're going to be a professional of some type. Doesn't everyone? And everybody they come in contact with in that culture, for the most part, because our cultures are stratified economically as well as other ways, reinforces that notion, if you will, that you will be successful, you will succeed, you will go to college, you will probably get a graduate degree, you will have a career that everyone can be proud of. Just the culture. Conversely, a lot of black kids, and again, I'm not talking about those least advantaged, if you will, I'm talking about the middle, are growing up today in a culture where they're buried classmates. Literally buried classmates. Where they have friends who are homeless. I mean, if you believe what the St. Louis Public Schools says, and I don't believe they lie, more than 10% of the total population of the St. Louis Public Schools are homeless. They're not growing up with that same expectation that you're going to go to college and grad school and you're going to succeed. They may be growing up with fear and uncertainty and wondering, am I lovable? I have this concept that the kids validate, not just kids, we all validate our worth by our perceived value of those who gift us with part of their life. And when those are people that you hold in high esteem, you hold yourself in high esteem. But that's not always the case. Sometimes your mama out doing stuff that, you as a child wouldn't be proud of. Or your father. Or you don't know who your father is. And it breaks my heart that so many people are brokenhearted because they don't know who their father is. So, culture is everything. Okay. Before we move on, anybody have anything they want to share? It's okay. Now's a good time. Or questions? Thoughts? Anything you may want to express at this point?
growing up, like I said, not meet my father until I was 23. And as you say, brokenhearted and a whole bunch of other things, and wanting to know who this person was or whatever. I would used to ask my mother all the time, "Mom, what do he look like? What does he look like? Where he work, what he do?" She would tell me, and then, but the main thing was she would say to me was, go in the mirror and look at yourself, and you're looking at him. I would go and look in this mirror, and I would stand in that mirror for about hours, checking every profile. Just looking at myself, and I stand there for a good hours, and I would say, I go back to my mother, and I told her, I said, "Mom, he cannot look this good. He just cannot look this good." But at the same time, when I did get a chance to meet him at 23, and I looked at him, and I was like, oh my God, she was right. Mm-hmm. Everything. And growing up, not knowing him made me do a whole bunch of things.
Let's talk about that. Help me understand that, because really, this is one of the things in my journey I really struggled with. What was it like to be a female without a father, and how did that impact your life in your perception?
Being a female, growing up without a father, made me angry. I felt as if, by not knowing my father, I felt as if my father, if I can use these words, fucked my mother, mm-hmm. and left her. Mm-hmm. And thinking that was the case, not knowing, I felt it. I said to myself at that time, I say maybe 12, 13, I said I'm gonna fuck every nigga I could. Excuse my term of expression, but I was gonna screw every man that I could at least once and hurt them, and try to hurt them like my father did and my mother. And I say, saying that I had children at 17, my first child, 18, I'm sorry. My son was born at 18. It kind of made me start changing my thinking process. But it still took me a while. And I started thinking to myself, how in the hell am I going to hurt somebody that don't even know probably don't even know I exist? Don't even, just didn't know anything about me at all. How am I hurt him? I was doing nothing but hurting myself. And when I finally came to that reality that I couldn't hurt him and I was hurting myself, I stopped.
Okay, so if I'm hearing you right, and I think I'm hearing you say this very explicitly, your quest to hurt males,
My quest,
to love them and leave them, if you will, was literally an attempt to hurt your father. Gotcha.
It was my form of calling myself of hurting my father. And current date.
Well, let me ask about this though, because I really want to understand, and I thank you for taking us there, because I really don't. I'm trying. I've struggled with this issue. Okay. Why were you angry? What was it that caused the hurt? Was it that his not being there made you feel like you weren't worthy, or
no?
Did you?
Let me explain like this. My mother had 5 children. I have 2 brothers and I have 3 sisters. My 2 brothers, they are older than I. They have the same father, and me and my sisters, we all have different fathers. So my little sister's father, her father was the father that was a part of our life growing up as children. She wasn't even born. I was a baby when it came along. And then once she, as we grew up and she was here, and then seeing that daughter-father relationship that she had with her father, wanting to be daddy's little girl, wanting to have my father dote on me or me dote on my father like my sister did. That was my issue. And then, as I said, knowing that it wasn't there, it made me very angry. It made me lash out. It made me fight. And I used to beat up a bunch of men folks. I mean, I'm literally going to school from kindergarten on up to 8th grade. My brother, like I said, my oldest brother, he was an outcast, and I was considered to be an outcast. And, he used to tell me all the time, because girls used to try to come at me, and then, of course, the guys used to come at me, and then my way of thinking about the guys, he used to tell me, you ain't gotta take that mess from them, and he would tell me, as far as the group of girls that wanted to get at me, he would tell me, you get that one, the one that they think she the toughest, you take her out, you ain't gotta worry about the rest. So, of course, I knew I could beat them up, but it was these other ones over here that I had this issue with, that I wanted to lash out all this anger on, which I did, and had several fights with guys growing up in grade school and stuff. But then, like I said, I changed my way of thinking after I got my children, and saw that I was going down a road that was, like I said, leading me into a spiral of sexual STDs, the possibility of sexual STDs, and additional children, and abortion, and a whole bunch of other things. So I didn't want to have kids in the beginning, so I didn't see that I had to. So that made me stop trying to hurt my father by getting at these men. But current date, I'm thankful and grateful that I got a chance to meet the man, even though it's been over 25 years or better now that I've actually got a chance to meet the man, spend some time with the man. And the relationship is still not what I would hope it would be, but I'm better today because of it. And I don't allow it to affect my life like it used to. Seeing that I am currently married, and my thing for my husband was, I was angry, and I was still somewhat angry, and at the same time, when I say he was a caregiver or whatever, but don't know how to receive it, he understands the information. I was hurt because of my father and the things I missed out with my father. But at the same time, knowing this information, I need you to fix it. Not necessarily say fix it, but me choosing you and me giving you the opportunity to be my husband, I need you to be there connected with me emotionally that you're not. And at the same time, that he's not connected emotionally with me because of it, I know he understands why I do what I do. I know he understands why I quickly snap off at him and things of that nature. And at the same time, me knowing, I try my best not to do it.
Don't bother me, I just laugh at him.
And see, and that's what I mean. Emotionally, not connected. And that kind of, even in the same breath of him not emotionally being not connected, it still kind of puts me over here to the side and saying, to hell with this shit. I'm done. That's where I am today.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. It breaks my heart.
Yeah.
I mean, it really does. I mean, I've been in church, say on Father's Day, and watch girls just crumble emotionally because he promised he would come and didn't, you know, or because she doesn't know who he is. And I often think about what is it? You know, I mean, what is it about us as human beings that has such a deep and abiding need to be well cared for by those people that traditionally would well care for us, if that makes any sense.
Yes, people that's supposed to take care of us.
Right. Sometimes even when we have someone else who has stepped into that space and is really trying to do a fantastic job at it. You know, like, you know, at some point you need to tell me how many grandchildren your grandparents had in their house, how many grandchildren they raised. I'm not talking about children, but grandchildren. But, you know, it's clear that you had grandparents during much of your formative years that really wanted the best for you, and I'm sure gave you all the emotional support that they were capable of. But it's also clear to me that this absent father created a hurt that still hurts.
It hurts, but it does not hurt as much.
Yes, which is good.
I think today is more disappointed, a major disappointment for me.
I know someone who never knew their father. You know, met their father once. And the first thing out of his mouth was, "What do you want from me?" Okay. And I'm not trying to make out like this is a bad person. I can't tell you why I say that, but her attitude is, boy, did he miss out on a good thing. You know what I'm saying? He could have had wonderful me in his life. But let me take you down a different track, okay? Because I think that often I feel that there's an implicit assumption that dad was trying to have you, as opposed to dad was having a sexual relationship with your mother with no intention of creating a child whatsoever. And you know, I'm old enough, I remember when birth control was problematic, you know what I'm saying? I mean, so, but regardless of, you know, where in time and the birth control cycle that was, you know, maybe not responsible enough to be using birth control, but maybe not certainly trying to have a child either.
Right.
You know, and not ready to step into marriage and parenthood and all of those responsibilities. And I often find myself wondering how hard would it be, or easy, or how harmful or helpful might it be to just look that little girl in the eye and say, okay, your dad didn't want you. He wasn't trying to have you, but so what? That takes nothing away from your value as a human being.
Right.
You know, it may say something negative about his value as a human being, but you don't even have to go there. You don't even have to go to the negative, you know. But don't create a void that you might do negative things to try to fill.
All right. Well, like I said, I'm not. I don't feel the need to do negative things to fill the void anymore, because I know today that I'm more than enough.
Right.
You know, like I said, meeting him. Like I said, the best thing about meeting him was that it helped me understand me. It helped me understand why I did the things that I did. You know what I'm saying? Just in having conversations with him and some of the things that I was doing as far as sexual activities, his was the same way.
I got you.
I'm just saying.
I got you. And I get the importance of this relationship. Yeah. But I want you to hold the idea that it's clear to everybody other than you that you ain't totally over it yet. Okay? And there's nothing wrong with that. Okay? But I want to tell you a story. Sometimes you run into interesting things at the most unlikely places. Okay, there's a park. This part of the St. Louis County park system. and I used to destroy the pronunciation of the name, but it's Lumiere Sculpture Park. And it's an outdoor sculpture park, and it's magnificent. You know, there aren't a lot of them on the planet, and most people think it's among the best dozen or so. And I'd bet 80% of the people in St. Louis never even heard of it. But I'm out there, and I'm in the, the museum house or whatever you want to call it. And every now and then they bring a major exhibition, if you will. And like museums are inclined to do, they do this ridiculously expensive catalog to go with that show. Mm-hmm. And, I'm kind of into magazines and stuff. And what fascinated me about this catalog is it had 3 covers. It was kind of folded like an accordion. Mm-hmm. So it had one cover, it had a second cover, it had a third cover. And the second cover kind of blew me away because it was just black with white type. Okay. And the type was kind of large. And here's what it said. You ready? And I'm going to change one word because I want to make it personal. Okay? If a piece of history of a person doesn't get resolved, then it is the present. It's always present.
Oh, wow.
It blew me away.
Yeah, well, it just blew me away.
If a piece of history of a person doesn't get resolved, then it is the present. It's always present.
Okay.
Now, interestingly enough, that was written in the context of Native Americans, okay? And it's a quote from a dude by the name of Jimmy Durham, D-U-R-H-A-M, who was born in 1940, and he's an American-born sculptor, essayist, and poet. He was active in the United States civil rights movements of African Americans and Native Americans in the 60s and 70s. I assume he's still alive because that little clip came from Wikipedia. And Native Americans aren't in great shape in America either. And that's another story that we'll address in another session. But here's what I want you to know. We know we're wonderfully adaptive creatures, right? I mean, we can adapt to things getting worse and worse and worse over time, okay? But we can do positive adaptations too. And it doesn't have to take any time. It can be instantaneous. Mm-hmm. In fact, what I like to tell people is that we're blessed to be able to wake up any morning we want to and redefine ourselves, recreate ourselves, rethink our being, create a new context that we can exist within. Okay? And here's what I want you to know. I can see the love in you. I can see the God in you. And you are a result of the sum total of your experiences. And one of your really key experiences was not having a father. And being able to know that pain. And you just helped a lot of people deal with that pain. Because, people are going to see this. And they're going to see the gift that you gave by being open and honest and straightforward. And they're going to bring little girls that need to hear, that need to feel and see what you just shared.
Because I have one. My granddaughter is, she loves.
Bring her to this work.
She's,
Bring her to this work. But let me tell you what I want you to do.
she'll be 11.
Let me tell you what I want you to do. I want you to wake up tomorrow morning and think to yourself, it just was. It just was. And there's no reason for me to carry any negative drag around as a result of that whatsoever. I have been blessed with the gift of that experience. And now I let it go, I set myself free, and I'm ready to soar. Promise me.
I promise.
Thank you.